The winter river moved like a ribbon of steel under the dawn, and the fog clung to the reeds as if afraid to let go. On that brittle morning in 1987, old Mr. Zhao trod the narrow path along the Li River outside Yongping, a farming village tucked between karst hills in Guangxi. He carried a bamboo pole across his shoulders, baskets empty, mind already on the day's catch. Then he heard it. A sound too soft to be a bird, too insistent to be the wind. A tremble of a cry. He stopped. The cry came again from the reeds, where frost dusted the stalks like salt. Mr. Zhao pushed aside the brittle grass with blue-veined hands and froze. There, wrapped in a thin cotton blanket stamped with tiny red carp, lay a newborn. The infant's cheeks were flushed from the cold. His fists were two knots of defiance. A scrap of paper, damp and buckled, was pinned to the blanket with a rusted safety pin. The characters bled from the moisture, but he could make them out. Born under the winter moon, forgive us. Mr. Zhao's breath fogged. He looked up river and down, half expecting someone to rush back, to shout that it was a mistake. But the river swallowed secrets without ripple. "Aya," he whispered, and tucked the baby into his padded jacket, against the beat of his heart. Word traveled faster than the river. By mid-morning, Yongping's square had gathered its quiet storm of faces. The village party secretary, Ms. Lin, stood crisp despite the cold, her clipboard a shield. Women pressed closer, their hands hovering with the restless tenderness of those who knew the cost of milk and sleep. "Whose child?" someone murmured. "He's so small," another said. A few men turned away, eyes hard with the arithmetic of survival that the late years of the one-child policy had taught them to perform without blinking. Ms. Lin examined the note, her mouth a thin line. "We'll inform the Bureau and take him to the county orphanage in Guilin," she said. "He'll be registered as a foundling." She glanced at Mr. Zhao, who still held the baby like a fragile catch. "We must follow procedure." At the edge of the crowd, a girl of 12, hair in two uneven braids, craned her neck. "He needs a name," she said. "You can't ride to Guilin calling him boy." The suggestion hung there, unexpected and warm. Names meant hope. Names tethered you to the world. Mr. Zhao cleared his throat. "Jiang," he said, eyes on the river. "River." The girl nodded gravely. "And Wei. Because he's brave." So it was. For the next 24 hours, he was Jiang Wei, river brave. The county orphanage sat behind a gate painted with peeling peonies, its courtyard full of laundry lines that fluttered like flags of surrender. A nurse with tired eyes and gentle hands received the bundle, her touch practiced and soft. She checked the baby's mouth, his lungs, his reflexes. "Strong," she whispered, surprised. "He's a fighter." A ledger appeared, thick as a winter coat. A clerk inked a new line. "Found male infant approx. 3 days old, reads by Li River. Note present. Temporary name, Jiang Wei." That night, Jiang Wei cried until the moon climbed free of the hills. He wasn't the only one. A chorus rose and fell from the nursery, a tide of need and protest. The nurse, whose name tag read Chow, hummed an old lullaby her mother used to sing when ration coupons were paper promises and city lights were a rumor. "Sleep, little carp," she murmured. "The river carries you." In Yongping, Mr. Zhao lay awake listening to the prints of wind on his window lattice. He thought of the damp scrap pinned to the blanket. Forgive us. He had seen hard choices take the shape of the unthinkable. He knew that poverty could be a trap with walls so smooth you slid toward its center no matter how you clawed. Still, he wondered about the hands that had placed the baby in the reeds. Were they watching from the hill? Were they counting the nights? Years later, those questions would echo in a different language, under a different sky. But on that first night, the story was only a cradle made of paper and river sound. Somewhere in the orphanage, a camera clicked. Routine. Just another intake photograph for a file that would be stamped and shelved. No one in that room could have guessed that a photograph, decades later, would do more than record. It would reveal. Have you ever held onto a single question for so long that it becomes part of who you are? If you were in Mr. Zhao's shoes, what would you have done that morning by the river? If this beginning pulled you in, please like the video, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Your engagement helps more people find stories like this. Would you keep watching to see where Jiang Wei's journey leads? The orphanage in Guilin became the first home Jiang Wei could remember, though he would later describe it as a place of both warmth and emptiness. The building was old, its paint chipped and windows clouded, but the courtyard bloomed every spring with cherry blossoms that spilled like confetti over the cracked stone. For the children inside, the blossoms were a miracle, something that came back year after year, even when so many other things disappeared. By the time Jiang Wei could toddle, he learned to cling to the nurse's skirts, chasing comfort where he could. Nurse Chow, the one who had received him on his first night, often carried him on her hip while she supervised the others. She had no children of her own, but she whispered, "You, little carp, you must swim far, farther than any of us." The years passed in a rhythm of laughter, scraped knees, and empty spaces at mealtime. Some children left with strangers, couples who arrived stiff with nerves, clutching documents and hope. When those children's names were called, they packed their few belongings into paper bags and disappeared through the gates. At night, Jiang Wei would press his nose to the bars, wondering where they had gone, whether someone tucked them in, whether they ever looked back. When he turned 6, his turn came. A couple from the United States, John and Margaret Collins, had been waiting for years after struggling with infertility. They arrived in the sweltering summer of 1993, Margaret's dress clinging to her back, John carrying a video camera with the wide-eyed wonder of someone who had never traveled beyond his hometown in Ohio. The adoption office smelled faintly of ink and dust. Papers were stamped, signatures exchanged. And then at last, Jiang Wei was led into the room. He wore a shirt too big for him. The collar frayed, and his eyes darted like a startled bird's. Margaret knelt, holding out a small stuffed bear whose fur had already worn thin from her nervous clutching. "For you," she whispered in careful Mandarin she had practiced for weeks. He didn't answer, but he reached for the bear, hugging it, as if it had always been his. John filmed everything, his voice trembling. "This is the moment we've waited for. He's beautiful. Our son." And though Jiang Wei didn't understand the words, he recognized the emotion. For the first time, he felt chosen. The flight to America was overwhelming. Airplanes were roaring beasts. Clouds looked close enough to touch, and strangers spoke a language that washed over him like rushing water. Margaret guided his hand to trace letters on a coloring book. A, B, C. John let him wear his oversized headphones and pointed out the window. "See that? That's the world waiting for you." In Ohio, the Collinses' home felt like another universe. A yard with green grass, a golden retriever named Daisy who bounded into him with unfiltered joy, a bedroom painted sky blue with a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Margaret tucked him in and whispered, "You're safe now." Jiang Wei clutched the stuffed bear and believed her, at least for that night. School brought challenges. His English was halting, his accent thick. Children sometimes mocked him with slanted eyes or sang nonsense words, but there were also moments of kindness. A teacher who stayed after hours to help him read. A neighbor boy who taught him how to throw a baseball. Slowly, Jiang Wei, now officially named Daniel Collins, began to build a bridge between two worlds. Still, questions lingered. Why had he been left by the river? Did his birth parents think of him? On quiet nights when the cicadas hummed outside and Daisy curled by his feet, he would stare at the shadows on his ceiling and imagine faces he had never seen. Margaret noticed his silences, sometimes touching his hand. "You don't have to hide your questions," she said softly. But Daniel didn't know how to ask without breaking the fragile happiness they had given him. As the years went by, the boy by the river became a teenager in America, with a Midwestern drawl and a love for baseball. Yet deep inside, the river still whispered. The note pinned to his blanket, the mystery of forgiveness begged but not explained, would not let him rest. He didn't know it yet, but the answers would find him. Not through searching, but through a photograph that would surface decades later, carrying the weight of everything he had been waiting for. Have you ever felt torn between gratitude for what you have and the ache of what you've lost? How would you balance those two truths if you were Daniel? Daniel Collins grew into adulthood with the river still flowing quietly inside him, though he tried to silence it with the noise of everyday life. He went to college in Chicago, studying architecture, fascinated by the way structures could rise from nothing but blueprints, order drawn from emptiness. He told himself that maybe, by designing bridges and buildings, he could also design a sense of belonging. Outwardly, his life was a success. He graduated, landed a stable job, and eventually moved into a small but modern apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. He visited his parents often, shared holiday dinners, and made them proud with every step. Yet when he looked in the mirror, he still saw a face that didn't quite match the photographs in their family albums. The Collin family features, pale freckled skin, sandy hair, round blue eyes, stood beside his dark almond-shaped gaze, his black hair, his slender build. No one ever treated him as anything less than their son, but the silent contrast carved a space inside him that no diploma or paycheck could fill. Daniel avoided questions about his past. When friends asked about his childhood, he spoke vaguely. "I was adopted from China when I was little." He never mentioned the river, the note, or the image of Nurse Chow singing him to sleep. He had convinced himself that digging into the past might only open wounds he couldn't close. And then, one evening in his early 30s, everything shifted. Daniel was scrolling casually through Facebook when a shared post caught his eye. A friend of a friend had posted an old family photograph, taken in rural China in the late 1980s. In the picture, a young couple stood stiffly in front of a mud brick house, a little girl holding a baby boy wrapped in a cotton blanket stamped with tiny red carp. Daniel froze. His breath caught. The baby's face, round cheeks, clenched fists, a small birthmark near the hairline was his face. Not just similar, identical. He enlarged the photo until the pixels blurred. His fingers trembled. That blanket. He had seen it before in one of the adoption files, the same pattern described in the orphanage records. The carp that had cradled him in the reeds. The caption read, "Family photo, 1987, Yongping Village. My aunt and uncle lost their baby around this time." He was never seen again. Daniel's heart pounded. His rational mind tried to argue. Coincidences happen. Faces look alike. Memories deceive. But the river inside him surged, whispering that this was no coincidence. This was a thread pulling him back to where it had all begun. He couldn't sleep that night. He printed the photo, taping it above his desk. He stared until dawn painted the sky pale gold, imagining the couple's faces alive, their hands reaching toward him. The next day he reached out to the person who had posted it. Her name was Mei Lin, a woman in her late 20s, living in Guangzhou. She replied with cautious curiosity when he asked about the photo. "That's my aunt and uncle," she wrote. "They always wondered what happened to their son. Do you think it could be you?" The question ripped through him. Could it be? Was this the family he had longed for, the ones who had written "Forgive us" and left him in the reeds? For days, Daniel lived in two worlds. At work, he reviewed blueprints, nodded in meetings, and walked through construction sites as though nothing had changed. But every night he returned to the photograph, searching for answers in the faded ink of memory. His parents, John and Margaret, noticed his distraction. Over dinner, Margaret finally asked, "Daniel, what's going on? You look like you're carrying something heavy." He hesitated, staring at the mashed potatoes on his plate. Then he pulled the photo from his jacket pocket and laid it on the table. I think I found them." Silence filled the room, broken only by the soft tick of the wall clock. John leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Your family," she whispered. Daniel nodded. The photograph had cracked open the river's dam. There was no turning back. Have you ever stumbled upon something, a picture, a message, an object, that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? The photograph was no longer just an image. It had become a doorway. Daniel stepped through it with trembling steps, guided by curiosity, fear, and an ache that had waited 3 decades for release. With Maylene's help, he arranged a video call with the couple from the photograph, now much older, their hair streaked with gray, their faces carved with lines that told of both hardship and resilience. They lived in the same small village of Yongping, not far from the riverbank where his story had begun. The moment the call connected, silence fell. The woman on the screen covered her mouth. gasping as tears welled in her eyes. The man leaned closer, his voice cracking. Tien. Tien? Daniel didn't understand the words at first. Mei Lin translated gently. They called their lost son Jiang Wei. They believe you are him. The name hit Daniel like a thunderclap. Jiang Wei, river brave. Different characters, same meaning. He pressed a hand to his chest, as if the sound of it might anchor him to the past he had never known. The couple spoke haltingly, their words pouring out like water from a dam. Through Mei Lin's translation, Daniel learned the truth. They had been young and poor, already with a daughter when he was born. The one-child policy loomed like a shadow, and whispers spread that families who disobeyed could face crippling fines, forced sterilizations, or worse. We loved you, his mother sobbed, but we were trapped. We thought, if we left you by the river, someone kind might find you. We prayed you would live. Daniel's throat closed. He had imagined abandonment as rejection, an act of cruelty. Now he saw it in the raw light of desperation, a choice made in the ruins of hope. But doubt lingered. Could memory and resemblance be enough? Mei Lin suggested a DNA test. Within weeks, a kit was mailed, swabs sealed, samples shipped across oceans. Those days of waiting stretched like years. Daniel went through his routine. Work, gym, dinners with friends. But every spare second, his mind returned to the test. What if it wasn't them? What if he was building a dream on sand? Finally, the email arrived, a confirmation of 99.9% probability. The couple from Yongping were his biological parents. Daniel sat in his office, staring at the screen as tears blurred the words. He thought of Nurse Chow's lullaby, of Margaret whispering, "You're safe now," of John teaching him to ride a bike. Two truths collided in him. He had been both abandoned and loved, lost and found, given away and chosen. When he told his adoptive parents, Margaret pulled him into a fierce embrace. "Finding them doesn't mean losing us," she said. John nodded, his voice steady. "Family only grows larger, son." The next step was clear. He had to return. He booked a flight to China, his heart thudding with a mixture of terror and anticipation. As the plane crossed the Pacific, he stared out the window, whispering to himself, "I'm going home." But which home? The reunion in Yongping was overwhelming. The village hadn't changed much. Narrow dirt paths, low houses with tiled roofs, chickens scratching in the dust. At the edge of the river, reeds still swayed in the current, indifferent to time. His parents stood waiting at the entrance of the village, their hands trembling. When Daniel approached, his mother ran forward, collapsing against him in sobs. His father stood close behind, his weathered hands gripping Daniel's shoulders as if afraid he might vanish again. "I thought I would never see you again," his mother cried in Mandarin, and though Daniel didn't know the words, he understood. Neighbors gathered, whispering, some wiping tears. The lost boy had returned, carried back by the current of time. That night they sat in the family's modest home. Photos of ancestors lined the walls, incense burned faintly in the corner, and bowls of rice and vegetables filled the table. Daniel's sister, the little girl from the photo, now a woman in her 30s, hugged him tightly. "I always wondered if you were alive," she said through Mei Lin's translation. Over steaming tea, his parents spoke of the day they had left him by the river. "We told ourselves it was mercy," his father admitted, "but not a day passed without regret. We prayed the river would not take you, that someone would." Daniel listened, torn between pain and compassion. His life had been shaped by their choice, yet it had also given him the family who raised him in America. Without the river, without the loss, he would not be who he was. As he lay down that night on a narrow bed in the house where he might have grown up, Daniel realized that his story no longer belonged to one country or the other. It belonged to both, to every sacrifice, every act of love hidden inside a wound. Sometimes the river carries us farther than we ever imagined, but it always remembers where we came from. Have you ever wondered how much of your identity is shaped by the family that raised you, and how much by the family that gave you life? The morning sun in Yongping rose slowly, spreading a soft golden light over the tiled rooftops. Daniel woke to the sounds of roosters crowing and the faint chatter of neighbors in the courtyard. For the first time, he opened his eyes not as a visitor, but as a son returning. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and boiled rice, ordinary to those who lived there, but extraordinary to him, who had dreamed of these sensations without ever knowing them. His biological parents hovered, still afraid that if they blinked he might vanish. His mother offered him warm congee with ginger, her hands trembling slightly as she ladled it into a bowl. His father sat beside him, silent but watchful, his eyes never leaving Daniel's face. Every gesture was heavy with meaning, as if the decades of absence were being poured into simple acts of care. Later, they walked together to the riverbank. The reeds swayed gently, the same place where Daniel's life had begun and nearly ended. His father stopped, staring at the ground. "This is where we left you," he said, his voice breaking. His mother covered her face, weeping. Daniel knelt, touching the damp soil, feeling the weight of that moment. He thought of Mr. Zhao, the fisherman who had lifted him from the reeds, of Nurse Chow who had sung him to sleep, of the Collin family who had given him a life filled with opportunity and love. And now, standing with the people who had given him life, he realized that his story was not about loss alone, but about the strange ways love survives. Sometimes hidden, sometimes delayed, but never truly gone. That evening, the village gathered for a meal in his honor. Tables were set in the courtyard with stir-fried vegetables, roasted duck, bowls of rice, and endless cups of tea. Neighbors who remembered the rumors of the lost baby came to see him with their own eyes. Some whispered blessings, others simply smiled, grateful that a wound in their community had finally begun to heal. Daniel raised a cup, his voice steady though his heart shook. "I was carried by the river, but it brought me back to you. I cannot change the past, but I can honor it. From today, I am both Daniel Collins and Jiang Wei." The villagers applauded softly, some wiping tears, his words echoing through the courtyard. When he returned to America weeks later, his parents, John and Margaret, were waiting at the airport with open arms. He embraced them fiercely, whispering, "I found them, but I also found myself." Margaret kissed his cheek, her eyes wet. "We never lost you," she said. In the months that followed, Daniel kept in touch with both families. He sent money to help his parents in Yongping repair their old house, while continuing to share holidays and traditions with his adoptive family in Ohio. 2 homes, 2 sets of parents, 1 identity finally whole. One evening, while speaking at a local community center, Daniel shared his journey publicly for the first time. "People often ask me if I feel abandoned," he said, his voice resonant in the quiet hall. "The truth is, I feel chosen twice. Once by parents who gave me life, and again by parents who gave me love. Family is not a matter of choosing between them. It is learning to embrace them both." The audience stood, many with tears in their eyes. Some whispered, "That's my story too," finding courage in his words. Daniel's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever wondered about their origins, everyone who had carried both pain and hope in their hearts. And as he closed his talk, he left them with a message as timeless as the river that had carried him. Family is not defined by blood alone, nor by distance, nor by time. It is defined by love, the love that finds us, the love that saves us, and the love that calls us home. Have you ever thought about what truly makes a family? Is it the people who gave you life or the ones who raised you, or maybe both together? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more emotional adoption journeys, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.